Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Royal BC Museum for episode 3 of our digital field trip teaser. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the Royal BC Museum is located on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, Songhees Squamish Nation, and it is my honor and privilege to be able to work, live, play, and especially learn on these beautiful lands. And I encourage you to know more about whose lands you're on today. The Royal BC Museum is located up in Canada on the far west side in the province of British Columbia. Here's a better example of where British Columbia is, and at almost the very southern part of Canada as well, is Victoria, and where the Royal BC Museum is located. And here's a photo of what it looks like from outside the museum. And now we're going to cut to inside the museum. Hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Arnold, and I am a digital educator here at the Royal BC Museum. And I'm currently in the exhibit we were in last time when we were in the Orca lab. We learned a little bit more about Rhapsody, who's right behind me. And today we'll be learning about captivity again with Mark Lear-Young. I'm going to quickly highlight his video. So, I'm not allowed to highlight his video, but he is there as well. Do you want to say hello, Mark?
Too funny. Hello. So Facebook's
Hello.
Zoom's not letting you play.
Oh no, that's okay. That is okay, but we'll make do. So before we go into captivity, I'm going to quickly flip the camera around. We will be going through the Indigenous section. Before we go into captivity, we won't be talking about detail about this very important section of the exhibit, but I do encourage you to either come on site to learn a little bit more, or also, if you visit the Royal BC Museum watch page, there is a $10 tour that you can buy with one of the curators who talks about this specific section. And also there's curators that talk about every individual section as well. So I please look forward to looking at that as well. But there is one piece we're going to be looking at that Mark's going to talk about before we move on to captivity. And also any questions that you have that we talk about today, please put that in the comment section on Facebook, and hopefully we can get to that today. But it's a very quick, only 20 minutes. So Mark, would you like to talk about this piece?
Absolutely. I really wanted us to kick off with this because this is a beautiful piece by Michael Nicolayagalanis that was commissioned for the exhibit. And he's an artist who created his very own style, which he calls Haida Manga. And so if you know manga, you know them as Japanese comics. And he talks about them as art without borders. So he's combined Haida art with Japanese manga style. And Jenny's reading my mind and going directly up to the corner where the name Orcinus for Orcinus orca, the Latin name for orcas we've also called killer whales over the years. And you're seeing the threats to orcas, including captivity. So this, to me, captures the entire exhibit in this beautiful piece. And Jenny's right on top of his family crest, which is an orca with a dual dorsal fin. But I can stare at this piece for hours because you can see there's the captive orca. There the orcas dealing with pollution. And there's some happy orcas up in the corner. And up in that top corner is Scanna, the Haida word for orca. And also the name of the first orca in captivity at the Vancouver Aquarium, which brings us straight to the captivity section and where my journey with these amazing orcas began. A little guy named Moby Doll. Now, I ended up involved with Royal BC Museum because I wrote a book called The Killer Whale Who Changed the World, and this is that whale. Because until July 16th, 1964, most humans on the planet in North America, especially most settler humans in North America, viewed orcas as monsters. That was the word we used for them. They were known as the only animal on Earth besides humans who killed for pleasure. Their reputation was that they were as awful as awful as great white sharks in the era of Jaws. They were the most terrifying beast on the planet. So they were so terrifying that the federal government decided we were going to wipe them all out in BC. We're going to set up a machine gun off the coast of Campbell River to take out the dreaded killer whales who were eating our salmon and scaring our tourists. And this wasn't an idle threat. The federal government had just wiped out a species known as the basking sharks. So the Vancouver Aquarium decided they were going to capture and kill, or decided they were going to kill a killer whale. They were going to harpoon one off the coast of Saturna Island, which is one of the best places in the world to get up close to a killer whale from the wild, or get up close to an orca in the wild. And I'm using killer whale because that was the term at the time, and still the term used most often in the US and a lot of other places. And there was a harpoon gun set up off the coast of Saturna by the Vancouver Aquarium. The guy running the harpoon gun had never actually used it before to catch anything and missed. So the harpoon goes right through the body of this young whale and hooks it. So instead of killing the whale like the harpoon was supposed to do, so the Vancouver Aquarium could create a life-size sculpture that they were going to display from their ceiling, the sculptor with the harpoon, Sam Birch, had accidentally harpooned a whale. So he and his assistant, Joe Bauer, led this whale back to Vancouver, where the whale was named Moby Doll. And people quickly realized that Moby Doll was not a monster, was smart, seemed to be friendly. So when Moby Doll was captured, the CBC TV News reported that the Vancouver Aquarium had captured a monster. Within almost no time at all, that monster became Vancouver's beloved killer whale. And this was both good news and bad news. The good news is after that, fishermen who'd been shooting at whales with rifles on a regular basis put down their rifles, stopped shooting at these orcas off the coast of BC. The bad news was that suddenly every aquarium on the planet wanted their own killer whale, because these animals still had a reputation as being fierce. So the same way that a circus always wanted to have a lion because lions were the most ferocious beast, or they wanted a bear, they wanted something ferocious. For an aquarium, the most ferocious beast out there was a killer whale. So somewhere off the coast of Namu, British Columbia, a couple of orcas swam into a fishing net. And the fishermen in Namu, BC decided that if there were people on the mainland, if there were people down in the city who were loopy enough to offer big money for an orca, then instead of shooting them, they would try and sell them. And one of those orcas escaped, and the other one was sold to the Seattle Aquarium for the whopping sum of $8,000, which I know does not sound like a lot now. But to give you a sense, I looked this up when I was working on my book, The Killer Whale Who Changed the World, and the price tag that was set for the value of Moby Doll was $20,000. And I spoke with Murray Newman, the guy who ran the Vancouver Aquarium, about why he chose that number. And it was kind of the biggest number he could think of. That's a number that would have bought you a mansion in Vancouver's poshest neighborhood in 1964. So he chose it because it was huge. Nobody was going to pay $20,000 for something. So $8,000, a lot of money. And $8,000 was nothing compared to what SeaWorld was prepared to pay if they could get a killer whale. So SeaWorld wanted to buy Namu from the Seattle Aquarium. The Seattle Aquarium said, no, Namu's ours, but you're offering how much? You know what we're going to do? We're going to go catch a killer whale. So Seattle Aquarium goes out and catches a whale, female whale. They try putting this whale in a tank with Namu. They do not get along. So they offer that whale to SeaWorld. SeaWorld says, can we call our whale Namu as well? Seattle Aquarium says, no, you can come up with your own name. So SeaWorld goes, they kind of shipped the name, if you know shipping, and went Namu, Shamu. That's how they came up with the name Shamu. But the other thing that SeaWorld did that made Shamu the most famous name for a whale in the world was the same way that different actors have played Batman, the Joker, Spider-Man, James Bond. What SeaWorld decided to do was that every orca they ever captured, they were going to name Shamu. So Shamu became the eternal orca at SeaWorld. Shamu never died. There were a lot of different Shamus at a lot of different SeaWorlds. And as a result, Shamu became really certainly for people visiting SeaWorld, but even for people just visiting the US, you would hear the term Shamu, and Shamu became kind of synonymous with the idea of killer whales in captivity. Uh, Things started to shift in a major way with the release of this movie, Free Willy. And one of the things that has been fascinating for me writing about orcas is I've been able to meet a lot of orca experts. And so many of the younger orca experts decided they were going to start working for orcas when they saw this movie, Free Willy, about a captive orca who kind of trained, really, the orca trains a young boy to be more human. And then Willy escapes doing something orcas do not do, which is jumping over something in water. They jump amazingly high. However, they don't jump over things because their primary sense is echolocation. So they don't really see what's up in the air all that well. So unfortunately, a real Willy would not jump over this. However, when the movie became a big deal, people started to learn about the real orca in captivity, who was the model for Willy, and that whale's name was Kiko. And children around the world led a campaign to free Keiko. And, this is one of those campaigns, one of those moments that kind of gives me hope that kids can change the world. And there are a lot of kids seeing this exhibit. And I wanted to point out that it was kids around the world who led the campaign that made sure that Keiko, who was kept in much nastier conditions than the imaginary Willy, was released from this marine park in Mexico. And there was a bit of a road getting Keiko out to Iceland, and there were all sorts of complications because nobody had really studied the Icelandic orcas. So it was very difficult to find Keiko's actual family, but Keiko was actually released in the wild. The other movie that really changed things, and to the point where I think, if you talk about whales today, chances are you've seen this movie, Blackfish, which is about orcas in captivity. Really, it focuses on SeaWorld. And we're at the Royal BC Museum right now, wherever you're beaming in from. So I want to mention that Tilikum, the star of Blackfish, was originally displayed very close to the Royal BC Museum, pretty much right around the block. Not quite that close if you live in Victoria, but not that far if you live anywhere else. So a few miles away at the Oak Bay Marina, there was a place called Marineland Pacific, and that's where Tilikum was kept uh, in really terrible conditions. And when you watch Blackfish, it's tough to imagine a tougher life for an orca than in those tanks at SeaWorld. Tilikum had a much tougher life in the marine park at the Oak Bay Marina because it was a much smaller tank that was being shared with two other whales. And those two other whales were not very nice to Tilikum. So when you hear about Tilikum, the killer whale has actually killed humans. The first human who was killed was at the Oak Bay Marina. Now we're at the Oak Bay Marina in a much happier photo. This is Paul Horn playing flute for Haida the Orca, and he actually released an album. And you can check this out on YouTube, Paul Horn with Haida. And one of the really early things that researchers discovered with orcas in captivity and orcas in the wild was how acoustic they were, and a real love for music, or certainly a real interest in music, to the point where music was just as acceptable a reward for orcas as food when researchers were trying to teach orcas behaviors. And when we're talking about captive orcas, one that I want to hit, and I don't know if Jenny's got an image handy, is Scanna, who was the first orca displayed at the Vancouver Aquarium. Moby Doll was caught by the Vancouver Aquarium, but Moby Doll was never displayed at the Vancouver Aquarium. Scanna was captured by the people in Seattle again, brought out to a boat show. The Vancouver Aquarium was not planning to buy an orca. They didn't think they had a good enough space for an orca. However, the orca, once Scanna was actually in Vancouver at a boat show in a very tiny swimming pool, the Vancouver Aquarium bought Scanna and hired this guy, Paul Spong, to train the orca and what happened and to study the orca's eyesight and intelligence. And one of the things that Paul Spong quickly discovered was that Scanna was training him. And he was so impressed by Scanna's intelligence that he reached out to an anti-nuclear organization in British Columbia. And that anti-nuclear organization was called Greenpeace. And he convinced Greenpeace that what they really ought to be doing was saving the whales. So if you want to know where the movement to save the whales came from with Greenpeace, that came from Paul Spong going, you need to meet this whale, and actually introducing one of the leaders of Greenpeace to Scanna. The other thing that Paul Spong did was, in order to get across how intelligent orcas are and what amazingly complicated beings orcas are, he borrowed Moby Doll's brain. And there's a photo of Moby Doll's brain next to a human brain that ran in a Vancouver paper to show what kind of beings Greenpeace was fighting for. And if you see an orca brain and a human brain next to each other, you very quickly realize orca brains are much, much more complicated. And I think, are we going to the wall of whales who changed the world? Oh, going past that?
Yes, I was also quickly just showing, I don't know if I showed it on camera, but in this exhibit, you may notice that the ceiling is a lot lower than the rest of the exhibit.
One of the things that's really powerful about this exhibit is trying to create a sense that you are experiencing what the orcas experienced. And it was pretty rare to actually put a net over the orcas, but this gives you a sense that you're kind of trapped when you're in the captivity area of this exhibit, which I think is really important to give you just a little bit of a sense of claustrophobia, because here you've got these animals that are used to having the entire ocean to roam, and they are acoustic animals. So their experience of the world is bouncing sound waves, bouncing their biosonar off things that are really far away from them. And suddenly they're in a tank where their biosonar is basically bouncing off something a few feet away. So it's solitary confinement for human does not begin to think in terms of the scale of a human in a cage versus an orca in one of these areas. And we're looking right now at Tocata Lolita, who people are fighting to release that whale now. She's the last of the southern residents, or the last of the Salish sea orcas that is still in captivity. And that could change anytime. And there's this great...
I was actually going to say, there is one question about, is captivity still a big issue for orcas today?
Captivity is not really. And one of the things that Blackfish has done is, I think people get the sense that captivity is still a threat to the orcas, even the orcas out here. And orcas in the Salish Sea have not been captured for captivity in decades. There are still some orcas being captured for captivity in Russia, mostly being sent to marine parks in China. The population of those Russian orcas is not phenomenally endangered, and most of the marine parks that you're seeing in North America and most places around the world have phased out the use of captive orcas and cetaceans. And there's an amazing project called the Whale Sanctuary Project, which is setting up some captive orcas will hopefully be released and get to live out their days in the ocean on the east coast of Canada.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I know, Mark, that you could talk for hours and hours more about this specific section, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. But thank you, everyone, for joining us for part 3 of our little mini series. If you'd like to learn more about our digital programming for our digital field trips, please look at our website. We also have tomorrow is World Whale Day event we're doing at 2:30 p.m. Again, come to our Facebook page and watch that live. And again, we'll be with you next week for our final installment of this program, and we'll be talking a bit about the Our Shared Future aspect of the gallery. So thank you so much, everyone, for visiting us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
And I'll answer questions on any of my Facebook pages and the Royal BC
Perfect.
Museums. Thank you so much.